The morning sun filtered through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. I stood behind the counter, running my fingers over the worn wood where thousands of coffee cups had left their mark over the years. In a few hours, I would have to hand over the keys to my slice of heaven, the Morning Light Cafe. "Sarah, you know this is for the best," Margaret Richardson said, adjusting her designer scarf with manicured fingers. My mother-in-law had the remarkable ability to make even sympathy sound condescending. "Running a cafe is hardly suitable for a widow in your position." My position. As if losing James 3 months ago had somehow diminished me, transformed me from a successful business owner into someone who needed their protection and guidance. The Richardsons had never approved of their son marrying a small-town baker, as they liked to call me, though they'd managed to hide their disdain better when James was alive. "The cafe is doing well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our revenue has actually increased since we added the new breakfast menu." "Dear," Margaret sighed, sharing a knowing look with her husband George, who stood examining our local art wall like he was appraising garage sale items. "The numbers you think are doing well are barely surviving. The property taxes alone in this area." I bit back a response. They had no idea about the property taxes because I had never shown them the real books. James and I had kept certain aspects of the cafe's operation private, knowing his parents' tendency to meddle. If they knew the truth about our financial situation, about the plans we'd made. But James was gone now, taken by a sudden heart attack at 34, and his parents had spent the last 3 months systematically dismantling everything we built together. "The papers are ready," George announced, finally turning from his inspection of local artwork. "Mr. Phillips will be here at noon to finalize the sale." Mr. Phillips, their family lawyer who had appeared with suspicious speed after James's death, armed with documents showing that the Richardsons had some claim to the cafe through a complex web of family trust agreements. I still wasn't sure how they'd managed it, but they'd made it clear that fighting them would cost more than I could afford. "I need to finish packing," I said, turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. The storage room still held boxes of James's things, recipes we developed together, photos of our early days when the cafe was just a dream, the special roasting equipment he'd surprised me with on our last anniversary. "Don't worry about any of that," Margaret said briskly. "We'll have people handle the clearance. You should focus on finding alternative employment." The way she said it made it clear she had something specific in mind. Probably the receptionist position at George's law firm that she'd been none too subtly suggesting. A respectable job, as she put it. I waited until they left before allowing myself to break down. Sliding down behind the counter, I pulled out the worn leather notebook James and I had used to plan our future. Inside, behind the recipe notes and profit projections, was a letter from the city planning department dated just 2 weeks before James died. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Richardson," it began, "regarding your inquiry about the proposed downtown development project. James had been so excited when we first heard rumors about the city's plans. Our cafe sat at the corner of what would become the centerpiece of a massive urban renewal project. The entire block would be transformed into a modern shopping and entertainment district. We had attended city council meetings in secret, gathering information, making plans. The property values would skyrocket once the project was announced. Several developers had already made discreet inquiries, offering to buy the building for well above market value. But we had bigger plans." I pulled out another document from the notebook. Architectural plans for an expanded version of Morning Light, incorporating the neighboring vacant lot we quietly purchased through a shell company James had set up. The new cafe would have been spectacular, with rooftop seating overlooking the planned central plaza. A knock at the front door startled me from my memories. Looking up, I saw David Chen, our regular customer and local real estate attorney, peering through the glass. I quickly wiped my eyes and let him in. "I heard about the sale," he said without preamble. "Sarah, you can't let them do this." "I don't have a choice," I replied, automatic response worn smooth from repetition. "They found some clause in the family trust." "There's always a choice," David insisted, pulling out a thick folder from his briefcase. "I've been looking into the property records. The way they're trying to claim ownership through the trust is questionable at best." "If you let me help." I shook my head. "I can't afford a legal battle, David. They'd drain me dry before we ever got to court." He started to argue but stopped, noticing something in my expression. David had been more than just a customer over the years. He'd become a friend, someone who understood the subtle dynamics at play. "There's something you're not telling me," he said slowly. I glanced at the clock. 10:45 a.m. The sale would be finalized in just over an hour. Part of me wanted to tell David everything, to share the secret James and I had kept so carefully. But the other part, the part that had spent weeks planning this moment, knew better. "Just promise me one thing," I said, pulling an envelope from under the counter. "Deliver this to Margaret and George in exactly 2 months." David took the envelope, frowning. "Sarah, what are you?" "Promise me," I insisted. 2 months from today, no sooner." He tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket, still looking concerned. "At least let me look over the sale documents before you sign. Make sure they're not." "It's done." I cut him off. "The terms are set. Just trust me on this." After David left, I spent the remaining time walking through the cafe, touching each table, each piece of equipment. The antique espresso machine James had restored himself. The wall of customer photos we'd accumulated over 5 years of business. The hidden corner table where he proposed, getting down on one knee with a ring nestled in a coffee cup. At precisely noon, the bell above the door chimed. Mr. Phillips entered, followed by Margaret and George, all three impeccably dressed for what they clearly saw as a victory lap. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Phillips asked, spreading documents across our largest table. I sat down across from them, the leather notebook clutched in my lap like a shield. Margaret was already talking about their plans for the space. Some pretentious wine bar concept that would elevate the neighborhood. If only they knew. I signed where indicated, each stroke of the pen feeling like a betrayal and a triumph all at once. James would have understood. He would have seen the beautiful irony of it all. "Here are the keys," I said, placing them on the table. "The property's all yours." "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice dripping with insincere concern. "I know this is difficult, but you'll see we're right. This is really the best thing for everyone." I stood gathering my few remaining belongings. At the door, I turned back one last time, taking in the sight of them examining their new acquisition like vultures picking over prey. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. "This really is for the best." They didn't even look up as I left, didn't notice the small smile playing at my lips. In exactly 2 months, they would understand exactly what they'd bought and what they'd lost. But for now, I had a plan to set in motion and a promise to keep to James. The game was only beginning. 2 weeks after the sale, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the documents James and I had spent years gathering. Property assessments, zoning ordinances, environmental impact studies, all carefully organized in color-coded folders. The wall above my desk was covered in maps and city planning documents showing exactly why our little corner cafe was worth far more than the Richardsons realized. My phone buzzed. A message from David. "They've started renovations. Margaret's supervising personally." I smiled, imagining my mother-in-law micromanaging the contractors, completely unaware of what lay beneath the cafe's foundation. The geological surveys we'd commissioned had confirmed it. Our property sat at the only viable access point for the underground parking structure central to the city's development plan. Without our land, the entire project would have to be redesigned at massive expense. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Amy, my former head barista and closest confidant. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was Margaret Richardson's latest social media post, a photo of her standing in front of Morning Light, now stripped of its signage. The caption read, "Exciting changes coming. The Richardson Wine Bar will bring sophistication to this neglected neighborhood." "Neglected?" I muttered. "We have lines around the block every morning." "There's more," Amy said, scrolling through photos. "They're gutting everything, even the original hardwood floors James restored." The mention of James sent a familiar pang through my chest. He would have hated seeing his beloved cafe dismantled, but he also would have appreciated the irony of what was coming. "Have they found it yet?" I asked. Emmy shook her head. "No sign they've discovered the basement vault. Though they did hit a snag when they tried to remove the espresso bar. Apparently it's anchored deeper than they expected." Of course it was. James had installed that bar himself, making sure it concealed the entrance to the vault where we kept our most important documents, including the original property deed with its very special clause. "Any word from City Hall?" I asked, turning back to my wall of documents. Nothing public yet, but my cousin in the planning department says the announcement is coming soon. They're just waiting for the final environmental impact reports. I nodded, checking my calendar. 6 weeks until David would deliver my envelope to the Richardsons. The timing had to be perfect. Just then, my phone rang. Margaret's number. I had ignored her calls since the sale, but something told me to answer this one. Sarah. Her voice held an unfamiliar note of tension. We need to discuss something about the property. I believe the sale was final. I replied coolly. The property is yours now. Yes, well, she paused. We've encountered some structural issues during renovations. The contractor found some kind of reinforced room beneath the main floor. The plans you provided didn't show any basement level. I smiled. You mean the plans your lawyer provided? The ones your son helped me falsify before he died. The silence on the other end was satisfying. What'd you just say? Margaret's voice had gone sharp. Nothing you need to worry about, I said sweetly. The property is yours now, structural surprises and all. Good luck with the wine bar. I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing. The game was entering its next phase. That evening, I met David at a small diner across town. The envelope I'd given him sat between us on the table as he reviewed the documents I brought. This is incredible, he said, examining the original property deed. The clause about mineral and development rights and the geographic survey results. Sarah, do you realize what this means? It means the Richardsons bought a surface property without reading the fine print. I replied, everything below ground level, including the access rights the city needs for their project, still belongs to me. David shook his head in amazement. James helped you set this up. It was his idea originally. We knew his parents would try something if anything happened to him. They never could accept that he chose a different path from their plans. I thought back to the days when James first told his parents he was leaving their law firm to open a cafe with me. The look of disgust on George's face, Margaret's tears and accusations. They had spent years trying to control him through the family trust, never realizing he was always one step ahead. The city will announce the development project next week, David said, checking his phone. Once they do, property values in the area will skyrocket. The Richardsons will think they've hit the jackpot. Until they try to sell, finished, and discover they can't without my approval. The development can't proceed without the underground access rights, and those belong to me. They'll fight it, David warned. They have resources, connections. And I have this, I said, pulling out one final document, a letter in James's handwriting, dated just days before his death. It detailed everything, his parents' attempts to control him through financial manipulation, their threats when he refused to fall in line, and most importantly, his decision to protect our future by separating the property rights. 2 more weeks, I said, glancing at the calendar. Then the envelope gets delivered. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Through Amy's network of loyal customers, I kept tabs on the Richardsons' renovation progress. They had finally discovered the vault, but the reinforced door had stymied their attempts to open it. Margaret was apparently furious, convinced I was hiding something valuable inside. She wasn't wrong, but she was looking in the wrong direction. 1 week before the envelope's delivery date, the city made its announcement. The downtown development project was unveiled with great fanfare. A $1 billion investment that would transform our quiet neighborhood into a bustling urban center. Property values doubled overnight. Real estate agents began circling like sharks, making offers on any available space. The Richardson social media exploded with self-congratulatory posts about their investment vision in acquiring the cafe. I watched it all from my apartment, adding each new development to my wall of evidence. The city's plans now included detailed renderings of the underground parking structure, accessible only through our property. Engineers had confirmed there was no alternate route that wouldn't require demolishing historic buildings. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Ms. Mitchell. The voice belonged to Daniel Morgan, chief developer for the city project. We need to discuss the property at 425 Oak Street. The Richardson Wine Bar? I asked innocently. Yes, well, that's partly why I'm calling. We've discovered some complications with the property rights. Our records show you still hold title to certain aspects of the land. I sat back in my chair, James's letter on the desk before me. I'm aware. We'd like to set up a meeting to discuss acquisition of those rights. The project timeline is rather urgent. Of course, I said. But I should warn you, I've already received several offers. He named a figure that made my heart skip. I countered with a higher one. By the end of the call, we had a tentative agreement that would make me a very wealthy woman. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. 2 days before the envelope's scheduled delivery, Margaret showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked different, her usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. "What are you playing at?" she demanded as soon as I opened the door. "The city's developers keep talking about complications with the property." "What did you do?" I let her in, watching as she took in my wall of documents, her eyes widening as she began to understand. "James helped me protect our investment," I said simply. "He knew you tried to take the cafe after he was gone. So we made sure you could only take what we were willing to give up." "You can't do this," she whispered. "The property is ours. We have the paperwork." "You have the surface rights," I corrected. "Everything below ground, including the access rights the city needs for their billion-dollar project, belongs to me. James made sure of that before he died." Margaret sank onto my couch, her designer outfit suddenly looking out of place in my modest apartment. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why would he do this to us?" "To you?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "You spent years trying to control him, belittling his choices, using the family trust to manipulate him. He built something real, something honest, and you couldn't stand it." "We were protecting him," she protested. "The cafe, it was so beneath him." "The cafe was his dream," I cut in. "Our dream. And now it's going to pay for everything we planned together." I handed her a copy of the city's development plans, watching as she realized the full implications. The property she thought they'd snatch away from me for a bargain price was worthless without the rights I still held. "George will fight this," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Good," I replied, "because in 2 days you're going to receive some very interesting documents. Things James wanted you to see after you showed your true colors." She left looking shaken, her perfect world crumbling around her. I watched from my window as she got into her luxury car, hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The next day, I visited James's grave, bringing his favorite coffee blend and the news he would have loved to hear. "We did it," I whispered, touching the cool stone. "Everything we planned, everything we built. It's all working out exactly as you said it would." In less than 24 hours, David would deliver the envelope that would change everything. Inside were copies of every document proving the Richardsons' manipulation, James's letter detailing their threats, and most importantly, proof that he had outsmarted them one final time. The game was almost over, and justice was about to be served in ways they never saw coming. The morning David was scheduled to deliver the envelope, I sat in his office watching the security feed from the Richardsons' law firm on his laptop. At precisely 9 a.m., he walked into their plush reception area, envelope in hand. "They're all gathered in the conference room," he told me through our phone connection. "George, Margaret, their lawyers, even some of the senior partners." "Perfect," I replied, my heart racing. Just like James would have wanted. The feed showed David being escorted into the conference room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Margaret's face go pale as she opened the envelope. George grabbed the documents from her hands, his expression darkening with each page he read. Inside that envelope was everything. Proof that James had legally separated the surface and subsurface property rights years ago. Documentation of the Richardsons' attempts to manipulate him through the family trusts, and most devastatingly, James's final letter to his parents. "Dear Mother and Father," it began. "If you're reading this, then everything has happened exactly as I predicted. You've tried to take what Sarah and I built, thinking you could simply sweep in and claim it as your own. But I've spent years preparing for this moment, protecting our legacy from your greed." My phone buzzed. A message from Amy. "You need to see this. They're tearing up the cafe floor." Attached was a photo showing contractors breaking through the hardwood, revealing the reinforced concrete beneath. They were obviously looking for something, not realizing that the real treasure wasn't in the vault they'd discovered. Back on the security feed, I watched George stand up suddenly, his face contorted with rage. The other lawyers were passing documents around, their expressions growing more concerned by the minute. "They just found the property records," David narrated. "They're realizing that without the subsurface rights, they can't sell to any developers. The wine bar is worthless. Another message from Amy. City inspectors just showed up. They're posting notices about required permits for structural modifications. Everything was falling into place exactly as James had planned. The Richardsons had been so eager to seize control of the cafe that they hadn't bothered with proper due diligence. Now their rushed renovations were about to cost them dearly. My phone rang. Daniel Morgan from the City Development Office. Ms. Mitchell, he said without preamble. We've reviewed your counteroffer for the subsurface rights. The council has approved the full amount. I smiled, thinking of the number we discussed, nearly 3 times what the Richardsons had paid for the entire cafe. When would you like to meet to finalize the paperwork? I asked. That's actually why I'm calling, he replied. The Richardsons' lawyers just contacted us. They're claiming fraud, saying the property rights separation wasn't properly disclosed during the sale. Check the sales contract, I said calmly. Page 17, paragraph 3, subsection B. They signed off on acquiring surface rights only to the property. It's in black and white. The security feed showed George storming out of the conference room, phone pressed to his ear. Moments later, my phone rang again. His number. You planned this, he snarled when I answered. You and James, you set us up. No, George, I replied evenly. You set yourselves up. You were so convinced you could bully and manipulate your way to what you wanted that you never bothered to read what you were actually buying. We'll fight this, he threatened. We have resources. So do I cut in. Thanks to you, actually. The money you paid for the cafe surface rights, James and I used it to hire the best property rights attorneys in the state. Would you like their numbers? After he hung up, I watched through the security feed as he returned to the conference room. The other lawyers were packing up their briefcases, clearly wanting no part of what was coming. Margaret sat alone at the table, still reading James's letter. Through the grainy footage, I could see tears running down her face. By afternoon, news of the development project had hit the local media. Property values in the area soared even higher as details of the planned transformation emerged. The Richardsons' wine bar concept, which had seemed pretentious before, now looked hopelessly out of place in what would become the city's premier shopping and entertainment district. I met Amy for coffee at our old rival cafe across town. She handed me her phone, showing social media lighting up with the story. They're saying the Richardsons got conned, she said, scrolling through comments. But anyone who knows the real story is celebrating. You should see what your old customers are saying. I smiled, remembering all the regulars who had supported us over the years, who had understood what Morning Light meant to the community. They would appreciate the justice of it all. A text from David interrupted our conversation. Margaret's here. She wants to talk. 20 minutes later, I walked into David's office to find my mother-in-law sitting alone, looking smaller and older than I remembered. James' letter lay on the table between us. Why didn't he tell us, she asked quietly, about the development plans, about what you were building together? Would you have listened? I countered. Or would you have tried to take control of that too? She dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. We thought we were protecting him. The family name, the legacy. James built his own legacy, I said firmly. Morning Light wasn't just a cafe. It was proof that he could succeed on his own terms, without your money or connections. And now, she asked, what happens now? I pulled out the city's final offer for the subsurface rights, sliding it across the table. Her eyes widened at the number. This is what you'll be fighting if you pursue legal action, I explained. Every major developer in the city wants these rights. They'll wait years while you tie things up in court. But in the end, the property laws are clear. James made sure of that. And the letter? Her voice cracked. The things he wrote about us, about how we treated him. That was his gift to you, I said softly. One last chance to understand who he really was, what really mattered to him. I left her there with the letter and the contract, knowing she had decisions to make. The Richardsons could fight, spend years and fortunes in court, but they couldn't change what James had done. He had protected our dream, ensuring it would survive even without him. 2 weeks later, I stood watching as workers removed the Richardson wine bar sign from the cafe's facade. The sale of the subsurface rights had been finalized, making me wealthy enough to buy back the surface rights at twice what they had paid. Morning Light would reopen exactly as James and I had planned. The new design incorporated both the historic building and modern elements that would complement the development project. The rooftop garden we had dreamed of would happen after all. Amy supervised as our old equipment was moved back in, including James's beloved espresso machine. The contractors had never managed to open the vault, which was fine. Its contents had served their purpose. David joined me as I unlocked the front door, the familiar bell chiming above. "They're still in shock," he said, referring to the Richardsons. "George retired from the firm yesterday. Margaret hasn't been seen at the country club in weeks." I ran my hand along the counter, remembering all the mornings James and I had spent here, planning our future between serving customers. "It was never about hurting them," I said. "James just wanted them to understand that success doesn't always look the way they imagined it." The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting the same warm light that had given the cafe its name. On the wall, I hung a new photo. James on opening day 5 years ago, his smile radiant as he served our first customer. Below it, I placed a framed copy of the city's development plans showing Morning Light as the cornerstone of the transformed neighborhood. Exactly as we had envisioned it. My phone buzzed, a message from Margaret. "He would be proud of you, of what you've built, what you protected." Maybe it was a start. Maybe understanding comes in small moments, in realizations that arrive too late but matter anyway. I began preparing for our reopening, measuring coffee beans into the grinder James had calibrated perfectly. The familiar aroma filled the air as customers began lining up outside, drawn by the grand reopening sign and the promise of something both old and new. Morning Light would shine again, brighter than ever. Not just as a cafe, but as proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply staying true to your dreams, protecting what matters, and letting justice unfold in its own perfect time. James had known that all along. Now everyone else did too. "Ready to open?" Amy asked, tying on her apron. I touched the wedding ring I wore on a chain around my neck, feeling James's presence in every corner of the space we had created together. "More than ready," I replied, turning the sign to open. The morning light streamed in, and with it came the future we had planned. Different than we'd imagined, but no less beautiful for the change. Sometimes the fine print isn't about what you're giving up, but what you're protecting. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the battle, but in the quiet wisdom of preparing for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice tastes exactly like a perfect cup of coffee, served exactly where it was always meant to be.
The birthday cake had 70 candles on it, and Mom looked happy as she posed for photos with my brother Derek and his wife Amanda. I stood off to the side, holding a glass of sparkling cider, watching the family celebration from the periphery where I'd existed for the past 3 years. "Sarah, get in the photo," Aunt Diane called half-heartedly, but nobody moved to make space for me. "I'm good here," I said quietly. It had been like this since I'd moved away. The family had decided I was running from my problems, abandoning my responsibilities, choosing some mysterious new life over them. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. And I couldn't tell them the truth. The truth was classified. 3 years ago I'd witnessed something I shouldn't have. I'd been working as a senior accountant at Morrison & Price, a mid-sized firm in Philadelphia, when I discovered irregularities in one of our biggest clients' accounts. Not small errors. Not accidental discrepancies. Systematic money laundering tied to an organized crime syndicate that federal prosecutors had been trying to crack for a decade. I'd done the right thing. I'd reported it. I'd testified before a grand jury. And then I'd become a protected federal witness under the U.S. Marshals Service Witness Security Program. Not full WITSEC. I hadn't needed a complete identity change, but enough protection that my location was classified, my communications were monitored for my safety, and certain assets had been placed under federal protection. Including the house I'd owned in Philadelphia, the 3-bedroom colonial I'd bought 5 years ago in a quiet neighborhood near Rittenhouse Square. The house was worth $900,000 now, nearly triple what I'd paid. The market had exploded. But I couldn't sell it. Couldn't live in it. Couldn't even visit it without U.S. Marshal approval and escort. It sat empty, maintained by a federal property management service, part of my protected assets until the trial concluded and the organization was fully dismantled. My family knew none of this. They thought I'd had a breakdown and run away. They thought the house was abandoned, forgotten, a symbol of my failure to commit to anything. "So Sarah," Derek said loudly as we moved from cake to coffee in Mom's living room, We need to talk about your property situation. I looked up from my phone. Pi what? Your house. He said it the way you might say your mess, or your problem. The one you abandoned 3 years ago. The one that's just sitting there empty while you're off doing whatever it is you do. I didn't abandon it, I said carefully. I had to relocate for work. Work. Amanda laughed, that brittle sound I'd learned to hate. You mean that mysterious job nobody's allowed to know about? The one that pays so little you can't even visit for holidays. I'm here now, I pointed out. After missing 3 Christmases, 2 Thanksgivings and Mom's last birthday, Derek shot back. You show up for one party and think that makes up for everything? Dad set down his coffee cup. Derek, what's this about? I'm getting to it. Derek pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then held it up showing what looked like a real estate listing. Your empty house is sold. I found a buyer, negotiated a great price and closed the deal last week. Someone had to pay your debts and handle your responsibilities. The room went very quiet. I stared at the screen, seeing photos of my house. My front porch, my living room, my kitchen, listed under sold, with a price of $875,000. You sold my house, I said slowly. I handled your abandoned property, he corrected. The place has been sitting empty for 3 years, Sarah. You weren't paying the property taxes, weren't maintaining it. The neighborhood association was threatening liens. I did what you should have done years ago. I took responsibility. How? I asked, my voice very calm despite the ice flooding my veins. How did you sell a house you don't own? Power of attorney, Amanda said proudly. Derek got it signed 2 years ago when you were still barely communicating with the family. You gave him authority to handle your affairs in Pennsylvania. I had never signed any such document. I never gave you power of attorney, I said quietly. Sure you did. Derek pulled up another photo on his phone. Right here. Your signature notarized and everything. You were so scattered back then you probably don't even remember. I looked at the document on his screen. It did have my signature. Or rather, a very good forgery of my signature. The notary stamp looked official. The date was from 18 months ago, during a period when I'd been in protective custody in another state, completely unreachable by my family. That's not my signature, I said. Oh, come on. Derek rolled his eyes. Don't start making excuses. This is classic Sarah. Avoid responsibility, blame everyone else, refuse to deal with reality. Where's the money? I asked. What money? The $875,000 from the sale. I used it to pay off your debts, Derek said. Property taxes, homeowners association fees, maintenance costs, legal fees for the sale. And honestly, after everything Mom and Dad have done for you over the years, I think they deserved some compensation for the stress you've caused. Mom looked uncomfortable. Derek, we didn't ask. You didn't have to ask, he interrupted. Sarah abandoned you. She disappeared for 3 years, barely called, never visited. The least she owes you is the money from that house she was never going to live in anyway. How much? I asked, still in that calm voice. How much went to Mom and Dad? $200,000, Amanda said. Which is more than fair considering they raised her for 18 years and she's been nothing but ungrateful. And the rest? Like I said, debts, fees, expenses. Derek shrugged. There's about $50,000 left. I was going to give it to you today actually. Consider it a gift for finally showing up to something. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket and tossed it on the coffee table in front of me. There's a check. You should be thanking me. I didn't touch the envelope. You forged my signature, I said quietly. You sold a house you had no legal right to sell. You took nearly $900,000 that wasn't yours. And you think I should thank you? I handled your mess, Derek snapped. Something you've never been capable of doing yourself. You ran away from your life, Sarah. You left everything behind like it was garbage. So yes, I stepped up. I took care of business. I did what needed to be done. Derek did us all a favor, Uncle Mike added from his chair by the window. That house was becoming a neighborhood eyesore. Empty properties bring down property values. He protected your investment and everyone else's. He committed fraud, I said. The room erupted in protest. Don't you dare, Mom said, tears forming. Don't you dare accuse your brother of anything. He's been here. He's been present. He's taken care of things while you've been off living your secret life, refusing to tell us anything, treating this family like we're strangers. We don't even know where you live, Aunt Diane added. You won't tell us what you do for work. You show up once a year if we're lucky, stay for an hour and leave. And now you want to complain that Derek handled your abandoned property? You should be ashamed. The house wasn't abandoned, I said. It was being maintained. Property taxes were paid. The mortgage was current. Someone was taking care of it. Who? Derek challenged. Who was maintaining it? Because I drove by there a dozen times and it always looked empty. No cars, no lights, nothing. That doesn't mean abandoned. It means you weren't there, Amanda said sharply. It means you left it behind just like you left this family behind. Derek did what any responsible person would do, he cleaned up your mess. I want to see the sale documents, I said. Why? Derek's eyes narrowed. So you can try to undo it? Find some technicality? The sale is final, Sarah. Closed. Done. The new owners take possession next week. I want to see the documents, I repeated. No. Derek crossed his arms. You don't get to waltz back into our lives after 3 years and start making demands. You lost that right when you disappeared. You want documents? Hire a lawyer. Oh wait, you can't afford a lawyer because you pissed away your career along with everything else. I took a slow breath. My phone had been vibrating in my pocket for the past 5 minutes. I knew who it was. The Marshals Service monitored my location at all times. When I'd entered Mom's house, they'd logged it. Standard procedure. But they'd also likely noticed the elevated stress indicators from my biometric monitoring. The fitness watch I wore wasn't just a fitness watch. Family nodded approvingly, I said quietly, looking around the room. Mom, Dad, Aunt Diane, Uncle Mike, my cousins Josh and Emma. All of them looking at me with disappointment. All of them certain Derek had done the right thing. Finally making sense, Derek said. Accept it and move on, Sarah. You're getting $50,000 you didn't earn. Take it and be grateful. I remained silent. My phone buzzed again. Then again. The doorbell rang. I'll get it, Emma said, walking toward the front door. I heard her open it. Heard her confused voice. Can I help you? Then a male voice, professional and firm. U.S. Marshals Service. We need to speak with Sarah Mitchell immediately. The living room went completely silent. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Sarah? There are federal marshals here for you. I'll handle it, I said, standing up. 2 men in suits entered the living room behind Emma. I recognized Deputy Marshal James Walsh immediately. He'd been my primary contact for 3 years. The other man was unfamiliar, younger, his hand resting near his hip in a way that suggested he was armed. Ms. Mitchell, Walsh said, his voice professional but his eyes concerned. We need to speak with you. Now. What's going on? Dad demanded. Why are federal marshals at my house? Sir, I need you to remain seated, the younger marshal said firmly. Everyone stay where you are. Ms. Mitchell, Walsh continued, focusing on me, we have a situation. Our property monitoring systems flagged unusual activity at your Philadelphia residence. A sale was recorded. Can you explain this? I didn't authorize any sale, I said clearly. I haven't been to that property in 3 years as per program protocols. Derek had gone very white. Program? What program? Sir, who are you? Walsh asked, turning to my brother. Derek Mitchell. I'm her brother. I sold the house because she abandoned it. I had power of attorney. You had what? Walsh's voice could have cut glass. Power of attorney. Legal authority to handle her affairs. The sale was completely legitimate. Deputy Marshal Chin, Walsh said to the younger man, call it in. Possible federal property fraud, witness security violation, and unauthorized access to protected assets. What the hell is happening? Derek shouted. Walsh turned to him, his expression cold. Mr. Mitchell, the property you sold is a federally protected asset under the Witness Security Program. It cannot be sold, transferred, or accessed without explicit authorization from the U.S. Marshals Service and approval from federal prosecutors. The sale you conducted is not only void, it's a federal crime. The room erupted. Mom started crying. Dad was yelling questions. Aunt Diane was demanding explanations. Everyone quiet. Walsh's voice cut through the chaos. Ms. Mitchell is a protected federal witness. Her location, her assets, and her identity are classified for her safety and for the integrity of an ongoing federal prosecution. The house in Philadelphia is registered under federal protection. Any attempt to sell, access, or transfer that property without proper authorization constitutes obstruction of justice and fraud. I didn't know, Derek stammered. She never told us. She couldn't tell you, Walsh interrupted. That's what classified means, Mr. Mitchell. And claiming ignorance doesn't excuse the fact that you forged federal documents and sold government-protected property. I didn't forge anything. I had power of attorney. Show me the document, Walsh demanded. Derek fumbled with his phone, pulled up the image and showed it to Walsh. The marshals studied it for approximately 3 seconds. This is fraudulent, he said flatly. Ms. Mitchell was in federal protective custody on the date this document claims to have been notarized. She was in Oregon. The notary stamp is fake. The signature is forged. And even if it were real, it would be void. Protected witnesses cannot grant power of attorney over federal assets without Marshals Service approval. How was I supposed to know that? Derek shouted. You weren't, I said quietly. Because I couldn't tell you. I witnessed federal crimes, Derek. I testified against dangerous people. The Marshals Service has been protecting me for 3 years while the prosecution built their case. That house isn't mine anymore. It's a federal asset held in trust until the trial concludes, and it's safe for me to reclaim it. You're a witness? Mom whispered. Against who? I can't tell you that, I said. I've never been able to tell you. That's why I disappeared. That's why I couldn't visit. That's why everything has been classified. But you let us think, Dad started. I let you think whatever you needed to think, I interrupted, because the alternative was telling you the truth and potentially putting you in danger. The people I testified against are part of an organization that's killed witnesses before. The Marshals Service relocated me, changed my routines, and put my assets under protection to keep me safe. And to keep you safe by keeping you ignorant. Jesus Christ, Uncle Mike breathed. Derek was shaking. The sale. The buyers. Will be contacted by federal authorities, Walsh said. The sale is void. Any money transferred will be frozen and returned. Any documents filed will be sealed. And you, Mr. Mitchell, will be facing federal charges for fraud, forgery, and obstruction of a federal witness protection program. I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter, the younger marshal, Chin said, having finished his phone call. Intent isn't required for these charges. You sold federal property. That's enough. Amanda was crying now. What's going to happen to him? That depends, Walsh said, looking at me. Ms. Mitchell, do you wish to press charges? The room held its breath. I looked at Derek. My older brother who'd bullied me throughout childhood. Who'd called me weak, called me a failure, called me a coward for running away. Who'd just admitted to forging my signature and stealing nearly $1 million. Yes, I said quietly. I do. Sarah, no. Mom screamed. He's your brother. He's a criminal, I said. He forged federal documents. He committed fraud. He sold property that was under federal protection, potentially compromising an active witness security case. If the people I'm testifying against found out about this sale, if they tried to trace the property records, they could have found me. Derek didn't just steal money, he potentially endangered my life. I didn't know, Derek whispered. You didn't care, I corrected. You saw an opportunity to take what you thought was mine and you took it. You didn't call me. Didn't ask permission. Didn't question why the house was empty. You just assumed I'd abandoned it, assumed I'd failed at something else, and decided you deserved the money more than I did. We're family, Dad said desperately. You can't do this to family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't sell property that isn't theirs. You want to talk about abandonment? Derek just tried to steal nearly $1 million from me and give you $200,000 of it. That's not family. That's theft. Walsh pulled out handcuffs. Derek Mitchell, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice in relation to a federal witness protection program. You have the right to remain silent. The scene devolved into chaos. Amanda was screaming. Mom was sobbing. Dad was shouting at me, calling me heartless, calling me a traitor. I stood quietly and watched as Walsh handcuffed my brother and led him toward the door. Ms. Mitchell, Chin said to me, we need to relocate you immediately. This incident has compromised your current security protocols. Pack whatever you brought. You're coming with us. I understand, I said. Sarah, don't do this, Mom begged, grabbing my arm. Don't take him away. He made a mistake. He didn't know. He didn't ask, I said, gently removing her hand. He saw an opportunity to profit from what he thought was my failure and he took it. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. You're destroying this family, Dad said, his voice shaking with rage. No, I said calmly. Derek destroyed it when he committed federal crimes. I'm just letting the consequences play out. I followed Chin to the door, leaving behind Mom's birthday party, the uneaten cake, and the family that had never understood why I'd disappeared. In the government SUV, Walsh turned to me from the front seat. You okay? I'm fine, I said. That was your brother. I know. This is going to be all over the news, he warned. Federal witnesses' brother arrested for fraud. It'll complicate the trial. Will it compromise the case? I asked. No. The case is solid. But it'll add media attention. Make things harder for you. Harder than the past 3 years? I asked quietly. He smiled slightly. Fair point. We drove to a safe house in Delaware, a nondescript townhouse that would be my home until the trial concluded in 4 months. Chin and another marshal swept it for security while Walsh briefed me on the new protocols. Your brother will likely take a plea deal, he said. Federal charges, clear evidence. His lawyers will want to avoid trial. What's he looking at? 2 to 5 years probably. Depends on the judge. The prosecutors are pretty angry. Witness protection violations are taken seriously. And the money? Already frozen. The buyers will get their $875,000 back. Your house is still secure, still under federal protection. Nothing actually changed except Derek's freedom. I nodded slowly. For what it's worth, Walsh said, you did the right thing. If you'd let it go, if you'd tried to handle it privately, it could have compromised everything. The organization you're testifying against has people looking for any weakness. A property sale on record with your name attached? They'd have found it eventually. I know, I said. Over the next few weeks, the story played out exactly as Walsh predicted. Derek's arrest made headlines. Federal witness's brother charged with fraud. The news stories portrayed me as either a hero for standing up to corruption or a villain for prosecuting my own brother. My family chose the villain narrative. Mom gave an interview to a local news station, tearfully explaining that I'd abandoned them, that Derek had only tried to help, that I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding. Dad released a statement calling me cold and unforgiving. Aunt Diane started a GoFundMe for Derek's legal defense. I watched it all from the safe house, sitting on a government-issued couch, eating government-provided meals, and preparing for the trial that had consumed 3 years of my life. Derek took a plea deal. 3 years in federal prison, 5 years supervised release, full restitution of all funds. Amanda filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The trial I was testifying in concluded successfully. The prosecution secured convictions against all 7 defendants. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. The criminal organization was dismantled. My testimony had been crucial. 6 months after Derek's arrest, I was released from witness protection. The threats had been neutralized. I could reclaim my life. I returned to Philadelphia on a cold Tuesday morning, Deputy Marshal Walsh escorting me to my house for the first time in 3 years. It looked exactly as I'd left it. The federal property management team had maintained it perfectly. Fresh paint, manicured lawn, updated appliances. But more importantly, it was mine again. Truly mine. Market value is over $950,000 now, Walsh said, handing me the keys. You could sell it if you wanted. I think I'll keep it, I said. For a while anyway. I'd already accepted a new position. Senior forensic accountant with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The work I'd done uncovering the money laundering had impressed the right people. My salary would be $156,000 annually with federal benefits and a security clearance. The job started in 3 weeks. I spent the first week back in my house just existing in it. Remembering what it felt like to have a home. A place that was mine that I could stay in without looking over my shoulder. My family reached out exactly once. Mom sent an email. Derek is suffering in prison because of you. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. We want nothing to do with you ever again. I read it once then deleted it. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply refused to let my brother's crimes go unpunished because we shared DNA. I'd chosen justice over family loyalty, integrity over convenience. The decision had cost me my family's approval. But I still had my house, my career, my freedom, my integrity, and honestly, that was worth more than their approval had ever been. 3 months later, I was sitting in my home office reviewing case files for the FBI when my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera, a feature I'd added immediately upon returning, and saw a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, professional clothing, nervous expression. I opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you? Ms. Mitchell? Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I'm an attorney representing your brother Derek." I started to close the door. "Wait, please." She held up her hands. "I'm not here to harass you or ask you to drop charges. Derek asked me to deliver something." She pulled an envelope from her briefcase. "What is it?" I asked. "A letter. He's been in prison for 6 months now. He's had a lot of time to think. He asked me to give this to you." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "Anything else?" "He's genuinely sorry," Jennifer said quietly. "For what it's worth. He understands what he did was wrong. Not just legally wrong, morally wrong. He stole from you. He betrayed your trust. He put your safety at risk. He knows that now." "Good for him," I said. "He doesn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted you to know." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the envelope for 20 minutes before opening it. The letter was handwritten, 4 pages long. "Sir, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care. But Jennifer said she'd try to deliver it, so I'm writing anyway. You were right about everything. I sold your house because I could. Because I wanted the money. Because I'd convinced myself you didn't deserve it, that you'd abandoned it, that you'd abandoned us. I told myself I was being responsible, cleaning up your mess, doing what needed to be done. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was jealous. You bought that house when you were 26 years old. I was 29 and still renting. You had a successful career, a beautiful home, your whole life figured out. And I resented it. I resented you. When you disappeared 3 years ago, when you stopped coming to family events and wouldn't explain why, I was almost happy. Finally, Sarah had failed at something. Finally, the perfect little sister had screwed up. I never considered that you might have a good reason for disappearing. I never thought maybe you were in trouble, maybe you needed help, maybe something serious was happening. I just saw an opportunity. The house was empty. You weren't there. And I knew where you kept your important documents from when I'd helped you move in years ago. I knew your signature. I knew how to forge it. I told myself I was helping. But I was stealing. From my own sister. I didn't know about witness protection. I didn't know about the federal investigation. But even if I had known, I'm not sure I would have acted differently. I was that far gone in my resentment. Prison has given me a lot of time to think about who I've become. About the person I was to you growing up. The bullying, the dismissal, the constant criticism. I was the older brother. I should have protected you. Instead, I tore you down every chance I got. You deserved better. You deserved a brother who celebrated your success instead of resenting it. Who trusted you instead of assuming the worst. Who asked questions instead of making judgments. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to drop charges or show mercy. You did the right thing, and I respect that, even though it's costing me 3 years of my life. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did. I understand what I've always done to you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for selling your house. I'm sorry for forging your signature. I'm sorry for stealing your money. I'm sorry for putting your safety at risk. But mostly, I'm sorry for being a terrible brother for 32 years. You're going to do great things, Sarah. You already have. I hope someday I'll be able to read about your success without feeling jealous. I hope someday I'll have become the kind of person who can be proud of you instead of resentful. I've got 3 years in here to work on it. I hope you have a good life. You've earned it. Derek. I read the letter twice, then set it down on the kitchen table. It was a good apology. Honest, specific, taking full responsibility without making excuses. It didn't change anything. Derek would serve his sentence. He'd be released in 2.5 years with good behavior. He'd rebuild his life somehow. And I'd continue with mine. Maybe someday, years from now, we'd have a relationship again. Maybe the prison time would genuinely change him. Maybe he'd become the brother he should have been all along. Or maybe not. Either way, I'd be fine. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer in my home office. Not thrown away, but not displayed either. Just filed. Part of the record. Part of the story. Then I went back to my case files. Back to the work of tracking financial crimes and building cases against people who thought they could steal without consequences. It was good work. Important work. And I was very, very good at it. 3 years later, Derek was released from federal prison. I heard about it through Aunt Diane's Facebook post. "Welcome home, Derek. We missed you." He never contacted me directly. Mom and Dad retired to Florida. I sent them a card when they moved but received no response. My career flourished. I was promoted to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I led investigations that recovered hundreds of millions in stolen assets. I became an expert witness, testifying in federal cases across the country. I eventually sold the Philadelphia house for $1.2 million and bought a beautiful brownstone in Washington, D.C., closer to FBI headquarters. I dated occasionally, made friends in my new city, lived a quiet and successful life. And I never, not once, regretted pressing charges against my brother. Because some things are more important than family loyalty. Things like integrity, justice, the rule of law. Things like knowing that you stood up for yourself, that you refused to let someone steal from you just because you shared DNA. Things like being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing even when it was the hardest thing. That's worth more than any family approval could ever be. That's worth everything.
The mahogany conference table at Morris & Associates law firm had never felt more like an execution block. My Uncle Robert's perfectly manicured hands slid the inheritance papers across its polished surface, his signet ring catching the light like a warning signal. "Sign it, Sarah," he said, voice dripping with false concern. "It's what's best for everyone." I looked around the room at the faces of my father's family. Uncle Robert, the self-appointed patriarch since Dad's death 2 years ago. Aunt Patricia, his wife, wearing enough diamonds to blind someone. My cousins Marcus and Victoria, both trying to hide their smirks behind expressions of fake sympathy. Only Grandma's seat remained empty. They'd made sure she was too ill to attend this meeting. The papers in front of me were simple enough. A complete renunciation of my inheritance rights to the Bradford family holdings, the company my grandfather had built from nothing 50 years ago. The company my father had helped expand before his accident. The company that, by all rights, should have been split between me and my cousins. We can't have someone so inexperienced handling such crucial decisions, Uncle Robert continued, adjusting his Rolex. The board agrees. The company needs strong, traditional leadership. Traditional, their favorite code word for male. I glanced down at my simple black dress, bought off the rack at a department store. They'd always hated how I refused to play their games of designer labels and country club memberships. Even now, Victoria's Channel perfume seemed to be waging war with my drugstore brand. The terms are more than generous, Marcus added, his MBA-polished voice carrying across the table. $5 million in exchange for your shares. That's more than fair considering your limited business experience. Limited business experience. I almost smiled at that. They'd been so busy watching their own reflections in their marble floors, they hadn't bothered to check what I'd been doing for the past 2 years since Dad died. And if I don't sign? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Aunt Patricia's surgically enhanced smile tightened. Then things could get very uncomfortable. The board has already expressed concerns about your father's unfortunate investment decisions before his death. a full audit might be necessary. There it was, the threat. They'd drag Dad's name through the mud, create enough doubt to tie everything up in legal battles until I was bankrupted by lawyer fees. What they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I'd sat in Grandma Aliner's garden, drinking her special blend of Earl Grey tea, as she explained exactly what she'd done. "They think I'm getting senile," she'd said, her blue eyes sharp as ever. "Let them. While they're busy planning how to steal your inheritance, I've already transferred controlling interest in the holding company to you through offshore accounts they don't even know exist." I picked up the Mont Blanc pen they provided, probably expecting the expensive weight of it to intimidate me. My signature flowed across the page, each letter a step in a dance they didn't know I was leading. "There," Uncle Robert said, unable to hide his triumph. "That wasn't so hard, was it? Security will escort you out. Don't bother coming to any future family functions." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Actually, I have a lunch appointment, but you all might want to keep your phones on this afternoon. I hear there's going to be some interesting business news." Victoria rolled her eyes, still playing at being mysterious, cousin. "This isn't one of your little charity projects." I walked to the door, then turned back. "You know what Dad used to say about the Bradford family motto? Fortune favors the prepared." I always wondered if any of you actually understood what that meant. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my lawyer. "Execute Phase 1. In the lobby, I passed the massive portrait of my grandfather, the company's founder. Most people saw an intimidating figure in an expensive suit, but I remembered him teaching me chess when I was 7. "The key, my dear," he'd said, "isn't just knowing the moves. It's making your opponent think they know yours." I stepped out into the bright autumn sunshine, counting down the minutes. By 2 p.m., every news outlet in the city would be running the story. Bradford Holdings' secret merger with its biggest competitor, orchestrated by the company's true majority shareholder, me. Uncle Robert's carefully arranged monopoly on the family's shipping empire was about to crash into the rocks, and he didn't even see the lighthouse. My phone buzzed. A message from Grandma. "Is it done?" "Just beginning," I replied. "Heading to the hospital now. Are you ready for visitors?" "Darling, I've been ready since your grandfather left me his secret shares 20 years ago. Today we show them what Bradford women can really do." I smiled, hailing a cab. The driver asked, "Where to, miss?" "Mount Sinai Hospital," I said. "I need to visit my grandmother before the afternoon news cycle hits." As we pulled away from the curb, I watched Uncle Robert's precious law firm recede in the background. He'd spent so much time building his glass castle, he never noticed who actually owned the ground beneath it. The real inheritance wasn't in those papers I'd signed. It was in the lessons Grandma and Grandpa had taught me while everyone else was busy counting their money. Patience, strategy, and the understanding that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. My phone buzzed again, this time an alert from my real office, the one nobody in the family knew about. "Markets opening. Ready to proceed with announcement?" I typed back a single word. "Begin." By sunset, the Bradford family would learn what their precious motto really meant. Fortune doesn't favor the bold. It favors those who know how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Grandma Aliner's private hospital room felt more like a command center than a place of recovery. She sat propped up against crisp white pillows, her silver hair perfectly styled, multiple tablets arranged on her bedside table like battle plans. "Did they bite?" she asked as I walked in, her eyes gleaming with the same strategic sparkle that had built Bradford Holdings 50 years ago. "Hook, line, and sinker," I replied, setting my bag down. Uncle Robert practically danced when I signed. She checked her watch. A vintage Cartier that Grandpa had given her on their 40th anniversary. "It's 1:45. Market's close at 4. Are you ready for what comes next?" I pulled out my laptop, already in motion. Johnson & Pierce are announcing the merger at 2 p.m. sharp. Their PR team has been coordinating with ours for weeks. And Robert has no idea. He's too busy celebrating his victory to notice that his biggest competitor just merged with the company he thinks he controls. I smiled, remembering Uncle Robert's smug face. "The offshore transfers?" "Completed last night," Grandma said, pulling up documents on one of her tablets. "Your grandfather always knew Robert would try something like this after he was gone. That's why he left me controlling interest in the shadow companies, the same ones that just became majority shareholders in Johnson & Pierce." I logged into my secure email, checking the final confirmations. Everything was proceeding exactly as we planned over the past 2 years. While Uncle Robert and his children had been busy playing corporate royalty, Grandma and I had been quietly consolidating power through a web of holdings so complex it had taken 3 international law firms to structure. My phone buzzed. A panicked text from Victoria. "Turn on CNBC now. It's starting." I told Grandma, switching on the hospital room's television. The business news anchor's voice filled the room. "Breaking news in the shipping industry as Johnson & Pierce announces a surprise merger with Bradford Holdings through a complex series of offshore acquisitions. The deal, valued at over $4.2 billion, effectively consolidates control of the East Coast shipping corridors." Grandma turned up the volume as the anchor continued. In an unexpected twist, the merger appears to have been orchestrated by Sarah Bradford, granddaughter of founder William Bradford, through a previously unknown holding company. My phone exploded with notifications, calls from Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, Marcus, Victoria, board members, family friends, everyone who had sat silently by while they tried to push me out of my inheritance. "Should I answer?" I asked Grandma. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let them sweat. They'll all be here soon enough." Robert never could handle being outplayed. Sure enough, within 20 minutes, the door burst open. Uncle Robert stormed in, face red, his perfect suit slightly disheveled. Behind him, Aunt Patricia and my cousins huddled like a Greek chorus of designer outreach. "What have you done?" he demanded, waving his phone where the stock ticker showed Bradford Holdings shares soaring on merger news. I looked up calmly from my laptop. I believe the press release explains everything quite clearly. Bradford Holdings is merging with Johnson & Pierce. The combined company will be the largest shipping consortium on the East Coast. "This is impossible," Marcus sputtered. "You signed away your shares." "No," I corrected. "I signed away my direct shares in Bradford Holdings, but Grandma's offshore companies, the ones that actually control the voting rights, those weren't mentioned in your carefully worded document." Victoria stepped forward, her designer heels clicking on the hospital floor. "You can't do this. The board will never approve." "The board already has," Grandma interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like steel. "Check your phones. The vote was completed 10 minutes ago. Sarah's holding company now controls 57% of the merged entity." Uncle Robert turned to her, realization dawning. You helped her do this? While pretending to be sick." "Pretending?" Grandma laughed. Robert, I've been running this company from hospital rooms for 2 years. Your father taught me everything about this business long before you were born. Did you really think I'd let you steal it from his granddaughter? But the company needs strong leadership, Aunt Patricia protested. Traditional values. Traditional values? I stood up. Like loyalty? Honor? Taking care of family? Because from where I stand, you all abandoned those values the moment you thought you could profit from my father's death. I pulled up another document on my laptop and turned it to face them. This is a list of every questionable decision you've made since taking control of the board. Every inflated contract given to your friends, every nepotistic hire, every manipulated audit. Did you really think nobody was watching? Uncle Robert's face went from red to white. You're bluffing. Try me. I met his gaze steadily. Test whether I'm willing to launch a full investigation into the board's activities over the past 2 years. See how the shareholders react to that kind of scrutiny. The room fell silent except for the continuing market updates from the television. Bradford Holdings stock had jumped another 12% on the merger news. What do you want? Uncle Robert finally asked, his voice hollow. I closed my laptop. The same thing I've always wanted. What Dad worked for, what Grandpa built. A company run with integrity, not ego. You all have a choice to make. Work with me to build something better, or cash out now and walk away. Marcus laughed bitterly. You expect us to work for you after this? No, I replied. I expect you to work with me, or find another industry to work in. Your choice. Grandma pressed a button on her bed, calling a nurse. I think that's enough excitement for one day. Sarah, dear, would you mind having security escort them out? I believe they have some decisions to make. As they were led from the room, Uncle Robert turned back one last time. You planned this all along, every step. No, Uncle Robert. You planned this when you decided I wasn't worthy of my inheritance. I just decided to prove you wrong. After they left, Grandma reached for my hand. Your grandfather would be proud. Not just of what you did, but how you did it. I squeezed her hand gently. We're not finished yet. No, she agreed, picking up one of her tablets. Now comes the hard part. Actually running the company we just saved. My phone buzzed again. A message from our PR team. Press conference requested for tomorrow morning. How do you want to handle it? I looked at Grandma, who nodded encouragingly. Tell them the new CEO of Bradford Johnson Shipping will be making a full statement at 9 a.m., I replied. And make sure Uncle Robert's old office is cleared out by then. I have some redecorating to do. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over the city skyline. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, my father's family was realizing that they'd just been outmaneuvered by the very person they'd underestimated all along. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy, and proving that sometimes the best way to honor a family's heritage is to fight for it, even against your own blood. The morning of the press conference, I stood in my father's old office, now my office, adjusting my mother's vintage Rolex. Not a flashy piece like Uncle Robert's, but a quiet statement of elegance that told its own story. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see 3 cargo ships bearing the Bradford Johnson logo entering the harbor. The merger was already physically visible in the water. Ms. Bradford? My new assistant, Thomas, appeared at the door. They're ready for you in the conference room. And your family is here. I nodded, unsurprised. All of them? Yes, even the ones who weren't invited. Perfect. I checked my reflection in the window. The tailored navy suit I wore was expensive, but understated, chosen to send a message. I wasn't here to play their games of conspicuous wealth. I was here to work. The main conference room fell silent as I entered. On one side sat the board members and major shareholders, including several Johnson and Pierce executives. On the other, my family, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, Marcus, and Victoria, all looking like they'd aged years overnight. But the seat that drew everyone's attention was at the head of the table, where Grandma Aliner sat in her wheelchair, perfectly poised in channel, her eyes bright with triumph. "Good morning," I said, taking my place at the podium. "Thank you all for coming. Before we begin the press conference, I'd like to address some internal matters." I opened a folder and laid out several documents. These are the results of a preliminary audit of Bradford Holdings operations over the past 2 years. The findings are concerning. Uncle Robert shifted in his seat. Marcus suddenly became very interested in his phone. However, I continued, I believe in family and in second chances. So I'm offering a choice. I pulled out another set of papers. Option 1. Sign these new contracts. They include revised compensation packages, strict oversight requirements, and ethics clauses. You can maintain your positions within the merged company under new leadership and accountability standards. And option 2, Victoria asked, her voice barely hiding its tremor. Option 2 is simpler. Sign these resignation letters, accept your severance packages, and walk away. No investigations, no public revelations about the creative accounting I've discovered. Uncle Robert stood up, his face flushed. This is blackmail. No. Grandma spoke up from her seat. This is mercy. Something you didn't show when you tried to steal her inheritance. The company needed, he began. The company needed exactly what it's getting. I cut in. Fresh perspective, ethical leadership, and a return to the values Grandpa built it on. I checked my watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. The press is waiting. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. I watched my family huddle together, whispering furiously, occasionally glancing at the documents I'd laid out. Finally, Uncle Robert approached the podium. "We'll sign the new contracts," he said stiffly. "But this isn't over." I smiled. Actually, it is, because those contracts include non-compete clauses and mandatory cooperation with our ongoing audit. One misstep, one attempt to undermine this transition, and option 2 becomes your only choice. One by one, they signed. Even Marcus, who'd spent years telling anyone who'd listen that women couldn't handle complex business decisions, scrawled his name with shaking hands. As they finished, Thomas appeared again. "Press is ready, Ms. Bradford." I turned to the board members. "Shall we?" The press conference went exactly as planned. The markets responded enthusiastically to the merger announcement, and my prepared statement about modernizing while honoring tradition hit all the right notes. But it was the question and answer session that really drove everything home. "Ms. Bradford," a reporter called out, "your uncle was quoted last week saying you lacked the experience to handle complex business decisions. Your response?" I looked directly at Uncle Robert in the audience. "I think today's merger proves that experience comes in many forms. Sometimes the best business education comes from watching others' mistakes." Later that afternoon, I sat with Grandma in what had once been Grandpa's private study. The wood-paneled walls still held photos of ships from the company's early days, back when one man's vision had started it all. "He would have loved this," Grandma said, sipping her tea. "Not just the merger, but how you handled it. with grace and strategy. I learned from the best, I replied. You and Grandpa played the long game all along, didn't you? She smiled. William knew Robert would try to take over eventually. That's why he left me the controlling interests in those offshore companies. We spent years setting up the framework that you finally used. But why not stop Uncle Robert sooner? Because you needed to prove yourself. Not to us. We always knew what you were capable of. But to yourself. She set down her cup. Besides, watching Robert dig his own grave while thinking he was building a throne was rather entertaining. A knock at the door interrupted us. Thomas entered with a stack of papers. Final merger documents are ready for your signature. And there's someone here to see you. Behind him stood Victoria, looking uncomfortable in last season's Prada. Can we talk? I nodded to Thomas, who closed the door behind him. I've been thinking, Victoria said, playing with her bracelet, about what you said regarding family and second chances. And I was wrong. We all were. The way we treated you after Uncle James died, the things we said. She took a deep breath. I'd like to learn. Really learn, not just play at being an executive. I studied her for a moment. You understand you'll start at the bottom? No special treatment, no shortcuts? Yes. She managed a small smile. I hear the shipping logistics department is a good place to learn the business from the ground up. Monday, 8 a.m., I said. Don't be late. And Victoria? Leave the Prada at home. Cargo ships are messy places. After she left, Grandma chuckled. You're giving her a chance? Like you gave me one. I picked up the final merger documents. Besides, someone once told me that true strength isn't about crushing your opponents. It's about knowing when to help them stand back up. That evening, as the sun set over the harbor, I stood at my office window watching our ships move through the water. Each one carried not just cargo, but a legacy of my grandfather's vision, my father's integrity, my grandmother's wisdom, and now, my own determination to prove that the greatest inheritance isn't what's given to you, but what you prove you deserve. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Robert. You won. Congratulations. I typed back. No, Uncle Robert. The company won. The family won. And maybe, if you're willing to learn, you did too. Then I turned back to my desk, where a new set of challenges waited. Because while winning was satisfying, leading was the real test, and I had a legacy to build, one decision at a time. On my desk sat a chess piece, the queen from the set Grandpa had used to teach me strategy all those years ago. Beside it lay my old employee ID from when I'd worked summers in the shipping yard during college, learning the business from the ground up while my cousins lounged on yachts. Each piece told part of the story that had led to this moment, but the real story was just beginning. Because running a company isn't about who has the most power. It's about who knows best how to use it. And I had learned from the best.